President Biden is in Japan today for the G7 summit. He met with the country's prime minister earlier this morning, and they spoke about the strong ties between both nations amid threats of China's expanding military and Russia's war in Ukraine. They also highlighted their shared investments in technology. The president is expected to meet with other G7 leaders tomorrow. Now, the president's trip to Japan comes as White House and Republican negotiators try to work out a deal to raise the nation's debt limit. Biden is cutting his trip short and returning home Sunday in hopes of finalizing an agreement. CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion is on Capitol Hill with where things stand now. Good morning, Nikole.
Hey, good morning to you, Anne Marie. Speaker McCarthy is now directly negotiating with the White House. He said both sides met last night and will continue to work until they reach an agreement.
As rain pounded the tarmac where President Biden touched down to meet with global leaders in Japan, back home, his top aides conducted their own diplomacy on the debt limit.
I'm confident that we'll get the agreement on the budget, that America will not default.
The president's team huddled behind closed doors for hours Wednesday with representatives for Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who's also participating in the talks.
The only question is whether we have a Biden default or not. It's the president himself.
The bill is passed.
House Republicans have been pushing a bill they passed last month that would raise the debt ceiling through March of next year and slash $4.8 trillion in federal spending.
Where are you willing to compromise?
I'll show you when we're done.
One sticking point, whether to impose stricter work requirements for those on government assistance like food stamps or Medicaid, which the president said he may not accept.
If that's one of the things he's calling out, no deal.
Democrats are working on a potential backup plan if talks collapse, including a procedural move to force a vote on the debt limit. Meanwhile, a group of senators circulated a letter urging the president to exercise his authority under the 14th Amendment.
The United States has to pay its bills. It's in the Constitution. So it's a fight worth having.
Do you want the louder click or the softer click?
The uncertainty makes Annabelle Bivens nervous. She runs a pet store and a doggy daycare in Virginia and worries she may have to cut back on staff if the economy takes another hit.
Cutting hours is definitely going to be the first way that we go.
If the U.S. defaults, experts warn that people may not receive Social Security benefits, service members may not get paid, and it could rattle markets, which could impact 401ks and make it more expensive to borrow money. Anne-Marie?
So you mentioned the Democrats are working on a backup plan if debt talks fail. I can't imagine what sort of plan that would be. Janet Yellen is already taking what she calls extraordinary measures. I don't know if there are more extraordinary measures to take, but is that even realistic?
Well, there are extraordinary measures to a certain extent in the sense that they're quite rare here on Capitol Hill and with respect to the administration. I mean, look here on the Hill, House Democrats introduced what is called a discharge petition. They're still gathering signatures on that right now. They don't have enough to move it forward. They would need to peel off some Republican support and have Republicans sign on to this. But if it were to advance, that would allow for a clean up or down vote on the debt limit, which is what Democrats want without any kind of preconditions, which, these negotiators are now haggling over. The other suggestion is potentially, calling on the president to invoke the 14th Amendment. Democratic senators have circulated a letter that they intend to send to the White House saying that, to declare that this is unconstitutional and to, in effect, take that authority to, in essence, handle the debt limit so that the U.S. can still pay its bills. So both of these avenues would bypass Congress and bypass these negotiations more specifically. And so, it's up for debate. Certainly they are what you would call like the break glass options, as some Democrats have described them. But they are, plan B, C, D, and E if these talks go astray.
So, Nikole, with the president halfway across the globe right now, is he even involved in these talks since he's in Japan? I mean, he's kind of far away.
Yeah, well, the president said that he would keep in touch with his negotiating team and that he would continue to talk to congressional leaders. He is actually cutting his trip short so that he can come back and try to finish brokering this deal. Of course, the president is now in Japan. He was set to go to Australia for another set of meetings with global leaders, but that component of the trip has now been canceled. So the president is expected to return this weekend. And, Speaker McCarthy has said that they will continue to work even if it is through the weekend until they can try to reach a deal. Unclear if they can do it by the time President returns, but that certainly is a marker and goal for the parties.
Listen, before we let you go, I've got to ask you about New York Congressman George Santos facing a slew of charges. Republicans yesterday sort of sidestepped the opportunity to vote to have him expelled, to take a vote. Instead, they referred him and his issues over to the Ethics Committee. I want to play some sound from South Dakota Republican Congressman Dusty Johnson.
George Santos is a clown. I wish he wasn't here. He's not a serious legislator. If he went away, it would be perfectly fine by me. I would be shocked if he wasn't found guilty in a court of law and if he wasn't found liable by the Ethics Committee. When that happens, we will blissfully be rid of George Santos.
Tell me how you really feel.
Right?
I know. So listen, if Republicans don't like him and don't want him there, why not get rid of him? And I want you to give me, because I know there's the answer that politicians are saying, but there's other stuff behind that as well.
Yeah, well, look, I talked to New York Congressman Mike Lawler yesterday, who is part of the New York delegation and who has continued to call for George Santos's resignation, but he was one of the ones who supported this resolution yesterday to refer the matter to the ethics panel. And I asked him why, if you want this guy to go, why not just be done with it now? Why belabor the process? And what he explained is that there should be a process. He talked about the fact that in his recollection, there has not been a member of Congress that has been expelled who has not been convicted. Obviously, there is still a trial pending for George Santos. And so he said if we were to expel members of Congress simply for lying, then you would have a number of members who should be kicked out. And so he thought that it was more prudent for the Ethics Committee to handle this matter. The Speaker has said that he thinks that the committee can handle this in a very quick and rapid manner, and so Lawler agreed that he felt it could be done expeditiously and that this process should play out. I also talked to George Santos earlier this week about this resolution, and he said, of course, this was a Democratic-sponsored resolution, but initially, and he said that, he feels the Democrats are trying to be the judge and the jury here, and that, again, there should be that presumption of innocence until proven guilty. So certainly George Santos planning to ride this out, and for now, so are House Republicans.
Yes, they are. All right, Nikole Killion there on Capitol Hill for us. Nikole, thanks so much.